This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
Hi, my name is Pamela Fuselli, and I'm the host of Popping the Bubble Wrap. Are you the person in your family who worries about the safety of others, about buying safety products and using them? Are you yelling, "Yes, that's me"? This is the podcast for you. Raising a child or children can be a hair-raising undertaking, and keeping them safe is a priority. Parachute's Popping the Bubble Wrap podcast explores what you really need to think about as a parent or caregiver, and provides easy tips on prevention strategies. No bubble wrap here, though. Home is a place that kids spend most of their time, but our homes are designed for adults, and there are products in our homes that can pose a burn hazard for young kids. There's a reason why those countertop appliances have annoyingly short cords. Did you know that a child's skin burns 4 times more quickly and deeply than an adult's at the same temperature? This is because their skin is thinner than an adult's skin. You might think about hot drinks, pots on the stove, and fireplaces, but many burns are caused by hot tap water in bathtubs. Luckily, we don't see high numbers of these kinds of injuries, but when they happen, they are life-altering. Joining me today are Kim, Jen, and Mandy. Thanks so much for being part of Parachute's Popping the Bubble Wrap podcast.
Thanks for having us.
So was that a surprise to learn that hot tap water is one of the leading causes of burns for young kids?
Yeah, definitely. I think you immediately go to, a kettle. I always think about the kettle or, a pot of water that is boiling. I know the bathtub is an interesting one. My kids, I take a really hot bath on my own. That would be my preference. But I think about the kids getting into the bathtub and how dangerous that can be as well too, right? And not to instill fear into anybody, including me, but thinking about the idea that it could be a more serious injury for them. I hadn't really thought about those, those dangers. You immediately go to the more significant ones, I guess, or maybe even the more obvious ones, like a pot of water or a kettle, right?
Yes. I think every woman I know loves to take a really hot bath. So you're not alone in that way. Kim, maybe talk to me about or tell me about, what concerns you as a burn hazard in your home, and what's your approach to preventing burns from those hazards?
Again, I feel like I would take a very similar approach to how we previously discussed, in the sense that we are always constantly talking to the girls about things that don't touch. This is why we don't touch. When we're cooking and stuff, I will tell them, come here. And even them just standing near the stove, I show them, can you feel that? Can you imagine if you got closer? But no, it actually never dawned on me that hot tap water could probably do some damage as well, which is strange because, when you have a newborn, you're always taught that they regulate temperature completely different than how an adult does. So while you think you might be doing some good by bundling them up on a fall day, you may be doing them more of a disservice than you are doing them a favor. So it's interesting that you raise that point, because I as well that's not where I go when I think of a burn.
Yeah. You think of, spilling a cup of hot tea or, a pot full of water, if you're doing, pasta or vegetables or whatever. And then fireplaces. I don't know, Jen, what are some of the things that you think about? I know you have a young girl, 2 years old, a young daughter. Do you have a fireplace, or is that something that you worry about, or are there other things in your house that concern you?
We don't have a fireplace, but we do a lot of camping. We've spent the better part of the summer camping, and for us, bonfire safety has always been an important part. I remember as a kid camping with some family friends, and the little boy was running around without a diaper and fell backwards onto the campfire and has to this day apparently like grill marks on his behind. So I remember as a kid being there in that situation, and so that's always been kind of a concern of mine. we've been taking Elliot around campfires since she was really little. I mean, since not in the smoke and everything, but keeping her kind of aware of what's going on. I think, unfortunately, and I feel the same way about falls. I feel the same way about some other kind of households injury possibilities, that I would rather give her the tools to know how to recognize some of this stuff herself before kind of having to intervene. And so, with the bonfires, every once in a while we'll have to remind her to walk around the outside of the chairs. But for the most part, we've raised her so in a way that she kind of knows where she's allowed to go, and the fact that it's hot. It's the same with hot coffee, because that's my thing, is I always have a cup of hot coffee on me. And now when we're playing tea or we're playing coffee or whatever, she'll bring me a cup of coffee and she'll say, "Oh, Mommy, it's hot coffee." And so I think kind of getting her exposed to what it means to have a hot beverage or to have a hot piece of food, and to know what her comfort level is in being able to consume it.
Yeah. And you want them around, they want to be around you. You want them to be around you, and you want them involved with some of the things that you're doing. So, Kim, you talked about having the girls in the kitchen, and you do want them involved. And Mandy, I don't know whether your kids like to help you in the kitchen, but are there some things that you would put in place, to make sure that they can be engaged and help you and have fun, but be safe, especially from some of the burn hazards?
Yeah, absolutely. My kids love to cook with me, and it's one of our, I actually think it's one of our times that we bond together the most. So we've been, like Jen mentioned, talking about concerns or things to be cautious of since they were kids. I love the blowing. I've got a video of my son at maybe about Jen's daughter's age doing the same thing, blowing on hot tea as well. One thing that I always have done, and it's just been ingrained in me, because I've heard a story. It was a friend whose sister pulled the pot down by the handle. And it was, it's quite a bad burn. I have always turned the pot inside. So the handle is always on the inside. I use the back burners. Those are just things that I feel like I just naturally do at this point now, because of hearing that and the concern about it happening, and thinking this is an easy way to do it, right? You turn the handle inside, making it harder for them to grab at or accidentally hit when they're running around. My kids play race cars constantly. So, just even they're like running through the kitchen as they're going on things as well. And they've always been able to come up on the counter and cook with me, but trying to talk to them and making them, like you said, aware about what they need to be cautious of on their own, so that they're familiar with it. Because like all the other elements of safety, you won't always be there to do these things, and you want them to recognize, Kim, I think you mentioned that you want them to recognize what the concern is, so that they can be aware of what's going on as well too. So, talking about things that are hot, talking about the color of the stove too, so that the stove turns red, that means that it's hot, or it's hot afterwards as well. So lots of conversations, of course.
Yeah. Kim, do you have a fireplace?
We do not have a fireplace,
Okay.
but we have one at the cottage. So the girls were significantly younger when we first got the cottage. So the same rule that we have here at home for the kitchen, if they're not involved with cooking, they have a parameter. So they know, like, when mom's in the kitchen or we're at the cottage and we've used the fireplace, they have a parameter that, okay, during this time frame, you're not allowed to approach it because of these reasons. And like, even if it's not on, if we've recently used it, it's still fairly hot. And we actually have friends of one of our relatives who their 2-year-old daughter went up to a fireplace at a cottage that they were renting, and they had used it maybe about an hour before, and she had placed her hands on the glass and she got a really severe burn on her palms. So that's why I've always just taught them, here's your parameter. So like, even as an example, like when they're running through, I don't want them to accidentally slide or throw a toy onto the stove. So that's why I have found that having a parameter approach has been
Mm-hmm.
very helpful. But then even too, like, I still want them to have like a sense of independence. So for us, with washing hands, I'm not always standing there when they run into the bathroom to wash their hands. So it's very easy for them to tilt the tap a little further into the hot. So we've taught them like a way to check before you stick your hand fully underneath. Showing Charlie, because she can't identify stuff first, like the colors sometimes on the faucet that they have, like the red means it's going to be hotter and cold is going to be a little cooler. But, always just sticking a finger real quick before you fully put your hands under, or even just like watching for things like if there's steam coming from the water. Because I don't want to baby them in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I like my independence. Like, I like not having to always follow around them, right? Because the thing is who wants to do that? Like, I want to prevent these things from happening, but I also want them to learn and have their own independence too.
Yeah. Yeah, you need that balance. And I mean, who of us as adults haven't burned or almost burnt their hands under a hot tap? It's so easy to do. And some of the ways that we want to prevent some of those things are by actually having the hot water tank set at a temperature that would not cause a burn or a scald in such a short period of time. And just going back to the fireplace piece, I don't think people are aware how quickly they heat up, up to like 400 degrees Fahrenheit in 5 or 6 minutes. But then it takes such a long time for that glass to cool down. It's not like the glass that's in your oven where you can touch that even if the oven's on at 400 degrees because it's a different kind of glass. The purpose is to keep the heat in the oven to cook the food, whereas the fireplace glass is to get that heat out into the room. What would you do? Do you know what to do if a burn happens? We've got a lot of myths around, you put butter on it. I've heard mayonnaise. Do any of you want to hazard a guess in terms of what you would do if you had a burn?
I've had a couple of bad burns. In my older youth, I was making hot chocolate in a microwave, and I learned, and again, this is all learning experiences, but not all mugs are microwave safe, which is something I plan on teaching Elliot, because I learned the hard way when you grab it, your hand doesn't always come off of it. So, cold running water, and just keeping that going for as long as you can. I, like an idiot, decided to wrap it in paper, ice pack and paper towel, and finish my English homework because I was afraid of not having that ready for the next day, without completely realizing that I wasn't going to school the next day. I had a severe burn. So that at least is kind of the cold running water, proper bandaging, and then medical attention. Am I right?
Bingo. Well, you got it right. You definitely got it right. Cold running water. Definitely not the butter or the mayonnaise. That's an old tip from a couple of generations ago that doesn't work. Just as an FYI. So thanks so much, all three of you, for joining me today and sharing some stories, personal stories about unfortunate incidences that you've suffered a burn yourself, or someone who has. And as you know, they can be, once you have a scar from a burn, that's there for life. So and as I said in the beginning, it's not that many, thankfully, but we do want to stop the ones that are happening. But Kim, as you said, we want to balance that. We don't want to bubble wrap our kids. We want them to have that independence and to be able to put things into place that will keep them engaged and interacting in the place that they love the most, which is the kitchen and the bathrooms. Those are the fun rooms of the house, but keep them safe as well. So thanks so much for joining me today. Learn more about preventing burns and scalds in your home by going to parachute.ca/burns and scalds. That's parachute.ca/burns and scalds.
It's time to open your parachute.
Robin Stewart is the Child Injury Prevention Program Coordinator at the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute and brings a decade of experience providing family support services so children and families can thrive. Welcome to the podcast, Robin.
Thanks so much for having me today, Pam.
Robin, thankfully, burns and scalds are not high in number, but they can be quite severe and result in lifelong impacts like scarring. Parents might think of fire and the stove as sources of burns, but not as often about hot water. So what are some of the leading causes of burns and scalds and things parents need to watch out for?
So we know that most burn-related hospitalizations are due to hot liquids, and we know that this is really common in younger ages for children. And then in older kids, you see more of those injuries from flames. So when I'm talking with parents, I just really want to build that awareness of what the risks are and how severe burns can be when that happens. Those lead to really long stays in the hospital and really significant lifelong impacts. And as you had talked about a little bit earlier, there are differences in children that put them at higher risk for these kind of injuries. They have thinner and more sensitive skin, so those burns can really happen faster and more easily on their skin. So we do want to be watching the temperature of the water in our homes. We want to turn that down right at the water heater to lessen the risk of kids getting that hot water on their bodies. And one practice that I really encourage for caregivers in their homes is to think about their child's development and what kind of stages they're entering into and what skills they're developing at those ages. So I really like to see parents kind of get down on the floor with their children and examine the area that way. And kids love doing that as well. So if you kind of get down with them and see what they can reach and what's around in their spaces so that they're, if they can now reach the top of the table, you want to make sure that you're not leaving those hot items and that hot coffee sitting there at the risk that they could pull it down on themselves.
So being a parent is a really hard job, and watching your kids 100% of the time isn't possible. We talk about actively supervising your kids, but there are those times when you have to take your eyes off of them. What do you recommend to parents to prevent these injuries from burns and scalds? What are some of the tips that you share with parents?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that you bring up the supervision and that, it's easy to say supervise your kids all of the time, but we know that that's not always a realistic expectation. So what I really like to discuss with parents is finding a balance of when you can be actively supervising and then putting safety pieces in place for when you can't be. So that might mean that you're putting up a gate so that your children can't get into the kitchen when you're not able to be in there with them. But then when you do go in to make snack, you take down the gate, bring the kids, find a way to involve them in that so that you're working together. And that way you get to teach them those skills around all the different safety pieces in the kitchen, show them that the stove is hot and the knives are sharp and all of these different things, right? It's going to prevent all kinds of injuries, not just the burns. And then they see, the kettle heats up and we don't touch that when it's hot. We need to watch out for the steam. And having them involved. And when you're working together, then you are able to actively supervise while you're in there with them. But then when you're focusing on cooking, maybe you need to put the gate back up and put them kind of in the living room where they have a safe play space away from those hot items. So it's all about finding that balance of when you can have them involved and when you can supervise when they are near those hot items, but also teaching them. And that's always going to you know your children best, and that you're going to know where their abilities are and when they need reminders, what they're really capable of doing independently, and when you need to step in and stop them from something.
I think that's so important. And a theme that runs through this podcast is popping the bubble wrap. You want kids to be active engaged in cooking and things that are going on in the house at different stages that where appropriate. And, how do you engage them in cooking and being in the kitchen, which is such an attractive room for kids. There's so much. I mean, from the Tupperware and the wooden spoons that they can play with, all the way to helping mom or dad or grandma cook or bake. They want to be involved, and there's ways to engage them in that without exposing them to a hazard like the boiling water, the kettle, and the really hot tea or coffee or soup, anything like that, or the burns that they could sustain from the stovetop. So really important information for parents and things for them to think about. And I hope that a number of them, after listening to this podcast, are going to get down on their hands and knees, see their kitchen, especially and bathroom, and from the eyes of their kids, and what could be very attractive to them, but could be very dangerous. So thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Popping the Bubble Wrap is a podcast of Parachute, Canada's national injury prevention charity, whose mission is for Canadians to live long lives to the fullest by preventing serious and fatal injuries. We release episodes every 2 weeks. Next episode, we'll be talking about the dangers of speed on our roadways. Help us reach parents and caregivers by sharing this link with your friends and family and giving us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Popping the Bubble Wrap is produced for Parachute by Story Studio Network and Eye Contact Productions.
This is Story Studio Network.